So, fun fact, in Magic lore, the core people are always in a good mood. And it's because they're nomads.
We got jokes for your tokes. Comment below with your favorite deck as we get into Week 5 of Edge of Eternities Standard. Welcome back. This week we're taking a look at 13 major tournaments spanning 104 top 8 results, but none so impactful as Spotlight Orlando. Shocking the world, or perhaps more accurately, becoming the hero we all needled, Mono Red came out on top despite a top 8 that featured 6 Cauldrons and a mirror. While Cauldron may have had the most top 8s, Mono Red tied it for trophies this weekend while making up a far smaller percentage of the field statistically, Athena. Adding in that sweet Spotlight trophy, and I think we have our tiebreaker. Congrats to Mono Red for toppling King Cauldron, even if it costs us an emergency Vivi ban in the end. However, for clarity, let's note that Mono Red's meta share of top 8s this week increased from 10.6% last week to 12.5% this week, marking yet another steady increase as the evolution of this archetype continues to position a pile of hatred to take down Cauldron.
King Cauldron may not have won the biggest piece of hardware, but it still amassed an impressive 50 top 8 slots and 4 trophies, marking yet another meta share increase as it went from 43.1% all the way up to 48.1% this week, notching yet another 5% increase week over week as we finish out the season.
Dimir Tempo came in third with 17 top 8s and 3 trophies of its own. Dimir's numbers denote a meta share decline from 21.3% in week 4 down to 16.4% meta share this week. Furthermore, not a single copy made it into the top 16 of Spotlight Orlando, leaving all of us wondering just how large the gap is between this deck and Cauldron, despite its success at MTGO challenges.
Fourth place goes to Mono Black Aggro, an archetype that's mostly gone overlooked, but it's rapidly ascending. Only 3 top 8s happened for Mono Black this week, but it claimed 2 trophies, giving it the highest conversion rate of top 8s to trophies this week. Nonetheless, this archetype's meta share grew from 1.9 to 2.9% this week, so we're seeing some marginal gains.
Kicking off Tier 2 is Azorius Control with 4 top 8s, though notably not a single trophy. Nonetheless, a single copy did make it into the top 16 of Spotlight Orlando, bringing validity to this archetype's inclusion despite the rapidly declining meta share at 3.8%.
Sixth place goes to 4-Color Control with 4 top 8s of its own. This deck started as a brew on our Brewers Corners list, but climbed to a 3.9% meta share in top 8s this week. Be sure you get some reps in, because this list is growing in popularity.
Jeskai Control, our third straight control deck featuring Azorius base colors, managed 3 top 8s, which was good for a 2.9% meta share this past week. Now, there's no movement of consequence on this archetype, which means we're going to have to wait another week to see if it falls off or evolves.
And rounding out our tier list is Simic Counters with 2 top 8s and a 1.9% meta share, though notably no trophies. Simic is just barely making the cut this week, but the list gets a little tighter each time, so it's on our watch list for improving archetypes.
Over in Brewer's Corner, I'll break down Selesnya Smugglers and Dimir Control as some new spice to try.
And I'll be highlighting Golgari Grave and Selesnya Cage, each archetype showing a hot new piece of tech to consider. But first, let's warp on over to our archetype breakdown, starting with the new and improved Mono Red.
Brennan Roy won Spotlight Orlando by burning his way through a 674-player sea of Izzet Cauldron with the hottest hate on the market, so let's light it up. Now, last week we talked briefly about Razorkin Needlehead as well as our doubts with Sarkhan, and here we are, looking at the hybrid red aggro list that emphasizes the strengths without the same weaknesses. Now, 18 mountains here means that Scorching Shot is effectively a 3-drop a majority of the time per the Karsten math for having 2 untapped red sources that can cast it. But we're noticing that it's being included over the Twin Maw here because it can hit the creatures with flying, which is critical with Steam Core Scholar everywhere to be seen. Burnout Bastronaut. This was a card that we sort of missed in our early analysis, but has made a lot of waves recently. I'm just going to hover over this real quickly. The double strike at max speed is actually something that happens if you get this out on turn 1. So it's a nice little bit of tech for getting those early drops moving. And honestly, I look at this. This deck worked because the lack of Torch the Tower coming out of Cauldron going into Spotlight Orlando was readily apparent.
Yeah, the lack of torch was a pretty big downfall for that matchup, especially with the big tech being the 2 toughness creature. But now that Cauldron's probably going to adapt to this, do you think that mono red stays tier 1?
Not necessarily. I think really what you're looking at here is Cauldron is dominant in the tier 0 position, and you have Mono Red, Azorius Control, Dimir Tempo, and a few other decks as outliers. And wherever Cauldron looks, that's getting killed. But where it's not looking is where it's losing margin points that it needs. So the build we see for Cauldron, typically going into Orlando at least, was focused on the mirror match, and it was focused on, mid-range and control. It was not as focused on aggro in the main. Dimir was just a bigger threat that needed to be dealt with. Same with Azorius Control going into Orlando. But clearly, Mono Red guessed well and said, all right, the Eye of Sauron's not looking at us, so we're ready to go to the Mountain of Doom here.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Cauldron, you made a good point about it only being able to hit certain decks at a time, especially since most of your slots are already put in. You have so few flex slots. But speaking of Cauldron, we're going to go over to it. Is it Cauldron? Yeah, I think so. There's like 4 of them in there. Jack Potter made it to the finals of Spotlight Orlando with a heavily tacked Izzet Cauldron build that was prepared for control and the mirror, so let's dive in. We have a 3-1 split of Quantum Riddler across the main and the side, which is really difficult to kill with red removal, but it's a great card versus control because it's still just a little bit slow against red. We got the 1 main deck Wild Ride. This is a really cool tech against control. It provides you with some really good mid to late burst damage, especially after a board wipe. And if you have profs with this, you can just one-shot opponents. FOMO with Wild Ride, just boom, dead. You see no Tursa in this list, 3 Scholars, which is pretty difficult for control to kill, and is a really good response to the Devout Decrees we've been seeing in control sideboards to handle this matchup. And notably, like we said, all the red hates in the sideboard. That's why it probably lost in the finals.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong on that one. Now, Athena, looking at this, do you think that Cauldron is now going to have to slant to deal with mono red? And if so, where are we losing margin points? Where are we gaining margin points? What changes if we put those torches in the main?
So I don't think you have to slant super hard. I feel like torch in the main, at least in some number, is probably just good enough. I'd actually like to see what people can come up with to try to hit both matchups at the same time. Something like maybe a Screaming Nemesis. But in terms of which decks gain margin points, I mean, I think you start if you start to have to slant towards both aggro and control, Dimir starts to look pretty good.
Okay, so essentially what we're saying is if you got to slant low, then you're going to give Azorius Control some points. If you slant for both, Dimir gets points, and if you slant high, Mono Red gets points. So we're using 3 decks to essentially keep Cauldron in check, but it can only one of the 3 is potentially viable week over week because Cauldron can probably hit 2 of them.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, speaking of that 3rd deck, let's look at Dimir Tempo. Daniel Lakos took down last Saturday's 45-player MTGO challenge with Dimir Tempo, reminding the world that in a sea of cauldrons and dragons, we still have Curious Kaido to contend with. Now, looking at this list, it's balanced, right? We have the Feybloom Trick, which is for the mirror sitting in the main. We've got Skitter, which is mostly there for Cauldron sitting in the main. And we've got Preacher, which is mostly for aggro sitting in the main. So this is a very balanced way of saying the top 3 decks, we're going to have cards that skew a little bit for each, but we're not going to skew full, 3 to 4 cards in one specific direction. We're going to go for a balanced approach. I also look at the removal. And again, we have a very balanced approach. There are 5 different removal spells in here. And it means that we're not teching strictly for Cauldron, despite it having a 50% meta share. Although if you go to that sideboard, you see those 3 strategic betrayals and you go, yep, that's absolutely for Cauldron. Let's go ahead and just mark that down. That's what that's for. Not saying it won't come in against mono red, but it's there because of Cauldron, right? And of course, you got Corsi Revenant in the side. There's, that and the Preacher, they're there for mono red. So this is looking at the top 4 decks essentially and saying that's all we care about with this build of Dimir Tempo.
Yeah, it's usually really hard for a mid-range deck to stretch really far, but Dimir seems to be doing at least a decent spot. But the question is, can this deck ever take the top spot, or will it forever be fighting for second?
I think it's going to be fighting for a second until we see a Vivi ban, and there are going to be weeks where it's the right call, where Cauldron is splitting its resources and Dimir has the edge to go through, and that's going to be true of all of these tier 1 decks. You know, if the Eye of Sauron isn't on you, you can make it to Mount Doom and get that trophy. But the moment it's focused on you, you're getting obliterated. So I would approach the meta similarly. Like, we know Vivi needs a ban. We know it's not happening till November. So if you're playing standard RCQs and you're not going to play the de facto best deck of Cauldron, be aware that there's like 3 other ones, maybe 4, that are competing for second place, and you need to be able to read which one's Cauldron slanting towards. So do I think it's going to take the top spot? Probably after November, unless, they ban Curiosity and Kaido like they probably should.
That makes sense. We've seen the black removal package also get a bit worse, which also kind of hurts that matchup against Cauldron ever since rotation. But speaking of black removal spells, we've got mono black aggro. So 2 weeks ago, our group of guild mages tested a variety of mono black variants, hoping to find the right one for this Cauldron meta. But last Saturday, Jord won a 40-player re-CQ in Orlando with the latest evolution of this archetype. Given the color of that trophy, we finally come full circle to black and yellow. Let's go. Embrace the skeleton package. It is that good. Your miner can be bought back from the crimes from your Sunset Saboteur, which is a huge point of synergy, and I think a really good reason to be running Saboteur in this deck. We're seeing 4 tragic trajectories, which are activated by the timeline color consistently. And this exact type of list looks a lot better when you have a lot less Torch the Tower in the meta. Since Cauldron was kind of attacking control, all these cards that are usually weak to Torch and Fire Magic and those sorts of cards got to prop back up. And against Mono Red, we're seeing 8 lifelink creatures, 12 if you count the flipped Cecil.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very clever build. Let's just boil it down and call it what it is. It's a very clever way to build this for the existing meta. I love it. I've been waiting to see if Mono Black could find a way through, and we've been stumbling over ourselves trying to. But Athena, I look at this, and there are 22 lands, but 4 Elegy Acolytes. That's a 4-drop on 22 lands. Do we need a 23rd land, like in the form of another Soulstone, over perhaps the first Dark Confidant?
If anything, if we're gonna be this low on lands, I'd rather we go up on Dark Confidants over other cards if we want to stay this low. I know pre-rotation there was this mono black aggro deck starting to pop up that ran like 21 lands, but it had 4 Confidants and 4 Gixes. So you really drew all the cards you needed to hit your land drops to get to your turn 4 Shieldred or whatever it was. This, we don't have the same situation. So with only 1 Confidant, I'd rather just have the 23rd land.
That's fair. And I mean, I'm in somewhat of a similar boat. I call me a traditionalist, but I really like to make sure the mana-based math works and we don't get, screwed sitting there with 4 drops in our hand that we can't cast as we look longingly across the board. I've been in that position one too many times, fam. We're not doing that voluntarily anymore. But that's going to end Tier 1. Let's take a look at Tier 2 and kick things off with Azorius Control. Danielle Fournier finished in the top 16 of Spotlight Orlando this past weekend with their own variant of Azorius Control, highlighting a disappointing finish from one of the archetypes primed to have a breakout weekend in a Cauldron meta. But let's take a look at what they did right. So, 2 annuls in the main. I think they nailed that one on the head. Right now, it's countering 12 2-drops out of Cauldron, like 2 copies of annul absolutely warranted at this point. The part I love most are these 2 Essence Scatters in the main. This is so clever because Cauldron has moments where they get the combo going and you had to take a turn off to maybe wrath the board, and then they're just shoving Vivi on top and exploding with mana once again. And it's great to have hard counters for 2 mana when they're trying to resolve these creatures and keep, grinding that engine with Steam Cores into Quantums, yada yada. They don't play Cavern of Souls. Like, Essence Scatter is a hard counter for, I believe, more than 12, probably 16 creatures in that deck. So it's a reasonable inclusion at this point, and honestly, I may go up more copies depending on how this gets positioned as things go on.
I think Essence Scatter also solves a pretty big issue that Control has in being able to answer some of the bigger threats, things like Quantum Riddler, Meringue River Regent, or from Red, the Nova Hellkite. So I think the Essence Scatter is a really good hedge for that. But Brix, I have a question for you. Is this deck stretched just too thin between Red, Cauldron, and Dimir to really be Tier 1 again?
I think, again, we go back to the idea that it's never tier 1 in this meta because of Vivi's existence. Because I can build Control to take down Mono Red, I can build it to take down Dimir, and I can build it to take down Cauldron. But only if Cauldron's not paying attention to it, right? So it does get stretched a little thin because, for instance, against Dimir, you want Overlord of the Mistmoors, right? But you definitely don't want that against Cauldron, and it's absolute trash against Nova Hellkite. So, that's where we're running into these issues. And you're right, it does get stretched thin, and that's kind of what we've seen across these tier 1.5 archetypes in particular, is how do you position them and where are you willing to make your margin point bets, so to speak. So I think you're right on the money. It gets stretched thin, but even if it weren't, Cauldron can still blow it out just by caring.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially with these just having 2 colors in your deck apparently isn't enough, because we see people going over to 4-color control lately. And MTG Drip made it to the semifinals of Saturday's 40-player 4 p.m. RCQ in Orlando with 4-color control, highlighting the slow but steady rise of this archetype. So let's consult some star charts. We're seeing 4 stock-ups and 4 consults. This is kind of a sacrifice you need to make to hit all of your colors, since you're playing 4 different colors in this deck. But in case you can't hit all your colors right away, you need to buy some time. There is a ton of life gain here. We're seeing Inevitable Defeat, Lightning Helix, Jeskai Revelation, a whole bunch of ways to gain life through the aggro matchups. We have the 1 main deck Rest in Peace to fight Cauldron, which is kind of an interesting take. I've seen a couple of control decks do this. I'm not sure if I really agree with it, but people seem to be liking it. The interesting part is the Jeskai Revelation top end. Since we're not really running the threats to end games like Mistmoors and multiple Meringues or Bezas, the Jeskai Revelations are kind of our way to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, this list is so spicy to me. I've seen builds with Mystical Teachings coming out of Foundations, that old reprint, and for those of you who have been around for way too long, you remember the Drow New Mirrors back in the day with Mystical Teachings as 4 ofs in each deck. So I love seeing all these different variants as people use Inevitable Defeats to really push that last color into the pie. But Athena, are these extra colors worth the painful mana base that gets absolutely roundhouse kicked by Sunspine Links?
I'll be honest, the Black Splash seems really ambitious for a 4-mana removal spell when decks already struggle with 3-color mana. I mean, look at Pixie, right? We've talked about how inconsistent Pixie's mana base is, and this just takes it to a whole new level. I think I'd rather, honestly, just play 3 colors if I was going to do this, and even that's a bit risky. So I'd probably just drop the black and play Jeskai.
Well, speaking of that, let's take a look at Jeskai. King Harry played Jeskai Control to a top 8 finish on Saturday's 38-player MTGO Challenge, mixing a unique take on an archetype that has long been searching for a way to break through, so let's dive in. There's a Pixie value engine in Control here. I didn't really expect to see that. That was part of why I looked at this list and I'm like, oh, this is the spice. We've got to show it, right, Athena? We've got Pixie bouncing Thundertrap Trainers, Storm Chasers Talent, Rediscover the Ways, Outpace Oblivions, Roaring Furnaces, Mirror Rooms. There's just so many ways to get value out of it in this list, and that really does seem to be the focal point of this list, is that we are just trying to grind. And I love that they put Ghostly Dancer at the top end here. I had to read this card too, don't worry. I absolutely didn't know this card was printed. I went through and I was like, okay, what does this have to do with the list? But being able to grab those enchantments back, especially when you have ye old sagas like Rediscover the Way, that is a lot of advantage very quickly, and the ability to get that flying army if it sticks the landing is not so small.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see the game plan they're going for here, and it looks pretty interesting, but don't we want a few more bounce effects? I mean, 3 Pixies and a Get Out seems really light for how many things you want to bounce in the stack.
I think the problem is you're putting Pixie in a deck that doesn't fundamentally have aggro, right? So how many bounce effects can you afford to run? And honestly, part of me looked at it, I'm like, if these weren't all sorcery speed enchantments, I'd be on Sun Pearl Kieran instead of Pixie. But given that we're on sorcery speed, I get that the Pixies make sense. It's just a reset clock on sagas and important things. I don't think it's there for more than just a little extra value. We're not trying to do the nowhere to run plan and momentum breaker where we're just killing everything on sight. It's more so that we already have wrath effects and we're just trying to dig to it and use Pixie as that grind engine, so to speak. So I don't know that we actually do want more bounce effects for something like this.
Okay, that makes sense. I feel like it's an interesting deck building decision to kind of go for this like pseudo bounce plan with all these enchantments.
Oh yeah.
When a lot of the instants and sorceries are already so strong in standard.
Absolutely. And speaking of some of these things that are so strong in standard lately, let's talk about Simic Counters.
X-File made it to the semifinals of last Thursday's 42-player MTGO challenge with Simic Counters, bringing it back onto the tier list. So let's discuss why. Man, Gene Morph Imago is such a cool card. It turns your Ouroboros into an absolute monster. If you can get these two on the board, you're probably winning that game if you have any semblance of board presence. But to move on to other things, to talk about this list in particular, no more Schooners. We've dropped them. I mean, it makes sense. We have all these Abrades and Annuls running around in main board, so Schooner becomes a little bit of a liability. And we're still seeing some protection spells. Some lists run it, some lists don't. We're seeing the one royal treatment in the main, and the kind of pseudo protection spells in Sirox in the side. They're kind of like proactive protection. It's kind of cool to see it because we're going to start seeing a little bit more low to the ground removal spells. And of course, we have the Quantum Riddler in the board for grindy matchups because that's just the trend with blue decks nowadays.
Yeah, and I mean, this is yet another deck that, as long as Cauldron's not looking at aggro and really trying to interact in those early turns like that, it gains a lot of points on that. But looking at what's happening here, I mean, this is the end of the tier 2 list, right? What is holding this deck back from being tier 1 in your opinion?
I think it's kind of twofold. The first problem is the colors themselves. Simic has historically had a problem in metas that are fast because you just can't remove creatures. I mean, this list had, 3 removal spells in the main board? And that's just not enough. If Mono Red gets a little bit of a start, or if Cauldron gets a little bit of a start, they're just going to run you over, right? Mm-hmm. I think the other problem with this deck is it's very synergy-based. So a lot of your pieces kind of rely on each other. Like, the Gene Morph Imago is really cool, but like you really want it with things like Spyglass Siren or Ouroboros, because by itself, it's kind of whatever, right? And same thing with Ouroboros, right? You need to already have a wide board, and it's really easy to tech against the stack. You can run things like Fire Magic, and it screws over a lot of the creatures here.
Sure, so you're basically saying the design constraints give it some weaknesses that you can't design around and you can't correct for, so what's holding it back from being tier 1 is the design constraints to a degree, yeah?
Yeah, I would say so. Just, I mean, any deck in Simic colors is going to have a ceiling, in my opinion, unless they print some really good blue or green removal spells.
Which they just hate doing. Fair enough. And that's going to take us through our tier list, and we get to my favorite part of the show, Brewer's Corner. Let's go ahead and kick things off. Let's talk about Selesnya Smugglers. I have no idea how to pronounce this, so The Pepe made top 8 of SCG Con Orlando oversized card event with this beautiful monstrosity. Gang, I love that we finally figured out a way for survival to matter as a mechanic. I remember looking at this and thinking, if we can't cheat this mechanic, it's just never going to matter. But when you have the Siriyama, when you have Adagia, when you have Avendo, you've got ways to sink in that survival mechanic. So, of course, this is like the new Sneak and Show, right? Like, this is, if you took Sneak and Show out of Legacy and shoved it into Standard, this is basically what you get. You've got Konas to just dump in Vaultborn Tyrants in this entire top end. You've got Smuggler's Surprise to help supplement that, because obviously they're going to start targeting the Konas pretty quickly. And you've got the fact that this beautiful little Siriyama does a good job once it hits 7+ of saying, okay, these are not dying. We're keeping these around, right? So I like this because if you can do a quick Kona into, Vaultborn Tyrant, Valgavoth, any of that top end, that is going to be just a bear for everybody else to deal with. And like Valgavoth in particular looks like a nightmare for Cauldron to deal with once it gets on the board.
I would say Vaultborn Tyrant as a 4-of is the best thing to put down, honestly. It's so tough to kill. It doesn't die to most of the board wipes in the format. It's just this massive threat. It draws you cards, gains you life. It's about what you can ask for in a card to cheat out right now.
Yeah, and that ward of sacrificing 3 permanents sure makes Into the Flood Maw a lot worse. I'll give it that. But with that, let's go on to the next deck, Golgari Grave.
Dan Schriever, I think I'm pronouncing that right, won the SCG Con oversized card event with this. This deck's pretty interesting. It's kind of like Roots without Roots. We're seeing a bunch of these self-mill cards that you would normally see in Roots between Molt Tender, Overlord of the Baelmerk, Town Greeter, Esper Origins. These are the types of cards you already see in Roots, but we're playing a little bit more of like almost like a ramp plan with the Ice Till Explorer that lets you get out these other kind of bigger cards in here, right? You have the Colossal Rattleworms that can come in with Flash, because I think you have some deserts in here if I'm remembering correctly when I looked at this. Yeah, the Conduit Pylons. And then you have this, I mean, who doesn't love a good Disruptive Stormbrood, right? This card's just so versatile. It's a bunch of the stuff in Cauldron on both sides of the card. Season of Loss is a pretty interesting top end here. You're really kind of going for that effect as your finisher, since not a lot of the stuff here is great at beating down. But, I mean, it's a good card if no one's running just pure Rest in Peace style effects.
Yeah, and I love that Season of Loss can also just clear a very clogged board. You know what I mean? You can just say, sacrifice 5 creatures, don't care how hard you exploded Vivi, doesn't matter anymore. We're resetting the damn board, right? And that's so important to be able to do. That flexibility is massive right now. But we're going to kick things into the next gear and talk about a control deck that doesn't play Azorius Control. Love it. Love it. We've seen so many Azorius color bases, but it's time for a mill-based control deck, and Dimir can do it. By Evil Gola, top 8 of the Reese Q on Saturday in Spotlight Orlando, that 4 p.m. slot, 40 player. This is kind of just a wild deck, and I'm here for it. Like, the fact that we're running 4 Singularity Rupture as our top end, so it's just, all right, there's 7 Wraths at the top, and 3 of them Cranial Extract, and 4 of them mill half the damn library. And then, of course, you've got Monuments to finish the job. And this also, I love that we have Divert Disaster, right? Like, you're either countering the spell or you're going to get something out of it, but it's great early on, and it's not completely dead later, which is decent for a 2-mana counter spell. And last but not least, Darkness Crystal. I was wondering if this would find a home, Athena. I kept looking at this card and going, where the hell does this actually belong? You know, like, and I think it's this. I think it's this. A deck where you get to go, okay, Darkness Crystal, turn 4, turn 5, blow the board. And it reduces the cost of Singularity Rupture as well, so now you have 7 different Wraths that can hit on turn 5. So I don't know. I think it's spicy the way it's designed.
It's spicy. I've seen a couple of these lists running around. I'll be honest, I am not a huge fan of this plan. I think there's so many of these cards that are just dead if you top deck them without other synergy pieces. And man, I just hate River Churn Monument. I look at that card and I'm like, damn, I miss Jace.
I mean, I don't miss Jace as a player who really hated dying to Jace, but I do get what you're saying. It was a much stronger card overall. But with that, let's get into the last brew. Selesnya Cage is back.
And so many people just really love this archetype, and we keep seeing new evolutions with it all the time, which is pretty interesting. This one in particular has the 4 Ouroboros, which we're starting to see in pretty much every green deck that pops up nowadays. I mean, the card's sweet, right? You have any amount of board presence, it just pops off. And my favorite little pet card that's in here, honestly, is the Seraphic Steed. I love this card. It's interesting to see in this deck because you don't have any like real just 4 power creatures to immediately saddle it with, but you're going so wide that you can probably just do it regardless, right? Because you can do it with multiple creatures. So it's kind of a cool build. You're seeing Fenrir to help you ramp up to the pieces you need, so you're not just relying on Cage or Elf to do things. And I mean, who doesn't just love slamming an Elspeth later in the game off of a Cage, right? It comes down and takes over the whole game. It gives your aggro deck this grindy game plan as well.
Yeah, honestly, Athena, this is probably my favorite Cage deck I've seen in a while, because Cage plus Ouroboros is just, it's beautifully done, right? Like, that's exactly what you want to do. You want to play a deck that's going to swarm slightly, which you're going to get with Sandstorm Salvagers, Sanguine Evangelists, all that jazz. Like, you're going wide a little bit, and then you're slamming an Ouroboros off a Cage or not off a Cage, whichever, and that's going to lock the rest of the, like, that's just going to explode the board immediately, which is what we wanted to do with Cage in the first place. But the problem was always that the targets with Cage were so over the top in terms of mana cost that if you didn't get Cage, casting those sucked. But this build has Ouroboros as the thing you're trying to hit at 4 mana, so you can hard cast that without any concern, or you can cheat it into play off a Cage. Either way, by far my favorite build of this that I've seen in quite a while. But that is going to bring us to our final segment, Ahead of the Curve. Now, we have looked at 12 different archetypes in our recap. Athena, what are you going to be playing in week 6 of Edge of Eternities Standard?
Honestly, Rick, I'm done coping. I'm back to Cauldron. I'm done pretending this isn't the best deck in Standard. It's the best deck in Standard. This is my version that I've built to try to beat Mono Red while not losing too many points against Control. We're still able to run the side or the main board 1 Quantum Riddler, but we have the 4 Torch the Towers now. If anything, this list might give a little bit too much in the mirror, but like we said, you kind of have to pick and choose your battles. My favorite tech in this for both Red and Control, and why I personally really think you can do this kind of hedge for both, is Screaming Nemesis in the board. This card goes crazy. Against Red, it just stonewalls everything. If you have a Screaming Nemesis out, they just can't attack most of the time because they have no way of removing this without damage-based removal. And against Control, you can stop their life gain if you hit this with your own spell. So it's kind of gives you some interesting different angles to play from, because now they have to watch out for haste creatures, they have to watch out for planeswalkers, for 5-mana creatures, and then you still have all your main board tech like the Torch to Towers into the red deck. So I think this is about as balanced as I could go with the build to not lose too many points in either direction.
Well, and I like that you're pushing against aggro game 1 and acknowledging that you can afford to have a slightly worse matchup against slower archetypes in game 1, because Mono Red is the hotness right now. You know, like all those Scalding Vipers, Razorkin Needleheads, like you just need Torch right now. You cannot, take a bolt to the face from Razorkin before you start, moving things forward, right? So it makes a lot of sense, Athena. I think it's a balanced build going in. But as long as you're going to go for the balanced build, I'm going to go the other direction and say, round 4 Azorius Control, let's go.
Cope.
Yeah, the cope is real, gang, but I am doing it. So I took some notes out of what everybody else was doing, and this is where I ended up. I'm getting closer and closer to wondering if we even need stock up or if we just need instant speed fucking everything, because Meringue River Regent is so damn good right now. And you'll note there's no Beza in the main, there's no Overlord in the main. We're not playing around with any of that anymore. We need things with flexibility, and when they hit, they need to hit hard. And Meringue River Regent is perfect for this. So that's why we're up to 3 copies there. Same with Elspeth. Like, you need cards on this side of it that just shut the game out for everybody else, or time walk and buy you enough time to recover. And Elspeth, Meringue, they are doing that for us. They're either shutting the game out for us and closing it, or they are buying us a turn and a half to 2 turns. And that's what you need out of your top end. The mana base, I also went a little bit more balanced. I hated this, Athena. I wanted it to be 4 Restless Anchorage, but you're absolutely right. You need a couple Fabled Passages to balance the damn mana base, and I hate it. And I hate it. And I hate it.
I've been telling you for so long that 2 Fabled Passages in Blue-Eyed feel so essential. It's Deserted Beach, but it turns slower.
I know. It's killing me that you're right on that one. The only other piece I'll quickly say is that we did put a Pinnacle Starcage in the sideboard because it's not good game 1. You're going to see 3 to 4 Abrades probably in the main of most of these Cauldron decks game 1. It's a liability there. But post board, they are not keeping those in. So you get to have 1 copy of Starcage to help hedge with the 5th Wrath. And that has been putting in some work for me in the post board games. So I want you to start looking at Starcage as a great sideboard option and not a main board option, because the hate main board is way too dense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We're kind of back to where Temp Lockdown started as just a sideboard card, right? So I can get with it. I can get with it. Well, Rebels, another week, another battlefield. Stick with us, and we'll keep you ahead of the curve with our 5th week of Edge of Eternities in the books.
Last but not least, please like, share, and comment on this video to show support for your competitive community. We appreciate having all of you here with us, and we will see you next week.
Until next time, untap, upkeep, resist.